everybody, and welcome to the Paranormal Portal. I'm your host, Brent Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got an epic show ahead, but just remember, if any of you have experiences you'd like to share, I'd love to hear from you. You can either email me at paranormalportalradio@gmail.com or head over to paranormalportal.net and scroll down and find the button that says Interview Me, and that'll allow you to look at a calendar of possible times and dates and find a date that works for you. Love to hear your stories, so definitely get in touch with me. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Paranormal Portal podcast. I'm your host, Brent Thomas. Thank you all for coming in and joining with us today as we dive into yet another adventure of the strange and unusual. Thank you to all of you out there who continue to promote the shows and let more people know about it. And if you happen to have the ability, leave a review. I know I love reviews, and I rely on them a lot as I'm perusing other options, and so reviews go a long way to help support the show. We got a great journey today, folks. We are being rejoined by Jeff Guichard of the UK, who was just recently on and talked about his incredible adventures as a contractor in the UK and some of the strangeness he's experienced while on the job, and he's coming back now to take us further down his rabbit hole. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going in. Hey, Jeff, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on again, brother.
Hello, Brent. Thank you so much for having me back. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's always my pleasure. And I really like when guests come back because, everybody's got some experiences, but I love the opportunity to dive even further into what they've been going through and what they've seen. So, and again, special thanks, for choosing my show. Of course, that's always a rare honor for me when people want to be here. So, where are we going now? What's going on?
So I've got a few things that I've kind of jotted down. The one that sticks out a lot to me is back in the early 2000s, over in England, the government shut down quite a lot of, you call them mental asylums, we call them mental hospitals. Sure. Here, but they shut a lot of them down because they were too old and crumbling, and they weren't fulfilling the purpose, and a lot of times they weren't suitable they weren't set up for modern medicine, so they had big cavernous rooms, and right. So they thought, well, you know what, let's just demolish them all or turn them into flats. I wouldn't buy one, but that's what they did. I don't. Sure. And so I worked for a demolition contractor, and what his job was obviously was to demolish these buildings, but above all of that, he would send his crew in to rob anything in there of any value, any copper or steel or literally
scrap.
And a lot of scrap. But they had no real finesse. I'm pretty sure if they could do it like with a bucket and a digger, they would do. So we were sent in prior to them to turn off all the water and make sure that everything was, safe for them to disconnect. So I worked for this demolition contractor. I still do now, actually. He's a good friend of mine, but I was sent to quite a few jobs, but the one that sticks out is a place called Hellingley Hospital, and it's in I think it's East Sussex, down on the coast, the southern part of England. And I didn't know anything about Hellingley Hospital. I just thought the name was apt for a mental hospital, and you can't make it up. It couldn't be Pleasant Meadows, could it? No, it had to be Hellingley Hospital. And sure. And you can see it's online, and there's a Wikipedia for it. It's an absolutely sprawling metropolis of buildings. There was over 70 buildings.
Wow.
I think it was something like 400 acres. It had its own farm, train station, everything, bakery. It had the whole lot. So I was told to go down and disconnect all this stuff. And there was me and a friend of mine called Bob, and we would in the same van, drove down to the job. We got there at 7:30. The site foreman I knew was a guy called Brian. He's a lovely guy. He was gruff, and I was the only one that really got on with him. Everybody else was a bit scared of the bloke. So I was the one that kind of did all the communications. But we got on well because we talked about boxing and fishing and all of those things. So I was sent down, and there was another couple of guys that followed behind us. There was four of us in total. So we got to site, and this place was, Brent, it was sprawling. It really was, but it was so derelict. It had been abandoned for 10 years. All the windows were smashed in, and it was such a shame. But it was the beautiful, beautiful architecture, Victorian buildings. Brian had been there for about a week, and they'd had a team come in to almost do a disinfect clean, because there was a lot of homeless people in there and God knows what else. So prior to us going in to drain it down, they'd cleared all the glass away and all the other paraphernalia. And he was a lovely guy. So I met Brian there. I said, what are we up to? He said, okay. He said, a couple of lads go into the boiler room of this big building. He said, and you and Bob, we need to go in the building and start opening up the vents on the radiators to let the water out. So I said, yeah, not a problem at all. Let's do that. Now, we were in the main building. This main building, I think from memory, it was about 1/4 mile long. Ooh. It was massive. And it was a typical Victorian. So you had almost a central part that had a big roof on it and a pointy roof, and then 2 wings off of each side. And these wings went further back as well. Mm-hmm. And some of these rooms you could play 4 basketball matches in. They were huge. Wow. Huge. And I think they were dormitories, because not a lot of the floors had rooms. The second floor, first or second floor, had rooms like offices or maybe individual treatment rooms. But the top 2 floors were just open. And I think they must have had people in beds there, right? With no walls or anything like that. So imagine a huge room with a lovely wooden floor, and then giant big windows on the left-hand side, giant big windows on the right-hand side, and then 4 floors of those cavernous rooms. So I said to Brian, walked us down, me and Bob, and I'll still speak to Bob today. And he said, all right, it's up in there. And I said, all right. And he said, I'm not going in. And I said, okay, no problem. I said, well, just leave us to it then, no worries. So the other couple of guys went in the plant room, and me and Bob climbed in this building, and it was derelict, don't get me wrong, and there was holes and bits and pieces. They'd put tape round, and walls had been smashed in, but it wasn't by no means, like a horror film. It was quite clean. And so we go in with Bob. I didn't feel any different. It was just old and crumbly, but a bit creepy. So we go to the top floor, and me and Bob are starting to vent radiators, and it's quite interesting because I tried to speak to him about the events afterwards, and he would not talk about it at all, and even to the degree where he will change the subject, and I rib him for it, and I say, look, you don't want to believe and all this kind of stuff, but he's a tight-lipped fella. So we go up on the top floor, and we're doing our bits and going from room to room. So the top floor had rooms in, and we're going from room to room and emptying up the radiators and doing our stuff. And then as the day progressed, the conversation got less and less. We were quite jolly in the beginning, but then towards the end, you felt a bit heavy, and we're getting agitated with each other, and there was a real vibe about the place. Yeah. And we did the top floors, and we moved down. And bear in mind, there must have been 1,000 radiators in this building. There's a real mission to do. And while the other lads are in the plant room, the boiler room, we're up there draining. So we do the top floor, and we speak less and less, and we go down to the second floor, the next floor down. And bear in mind, there was a staircase in the middle, a big staircase in the middle, and there's a staircase at either end. So you could literally walk up the central staircase, walk along the rooms, and then down the staircase at the end. We'd have to go back through the rooms at the bottom to come out. The only entrance was the front. So we go up and we cut across, and we get down to the bottom stairs. And as we go down to the bottom one, it was a big, huge, long corridor with rooms on the right-hand side, not very big rooms, probably about 10-foot square, some 12, 14-foot square with windows in, with doors on. And then on the left-hand side, you had a big, long corridor with windows on your left. And these rooms went all the way down, these 2 rooms, which were, blimey, I'm going to say 100-foot long. These. Oh, wow. And yeah, and when you came up the central stairs, you had those doors that you get in a Western, go both ways. Yeah. So And then interspersed in about 25 to 30 foot paces all the way down, you had these foldy doors.
Yeah.
So we come up the stairs, we go through these foldy doors, and we go in these rooms. And all the rooms had doors on, and they had the old-fashioned doorknobs, the brass doorknobs, and they make a distinctive sound when they shut. You hear the doorknob rattle, don't you? And all of this. So we do a couple of free rooms. We're about halfway down, and we decided to take a break then. So Bob and I were sat on the windowsill smoking a cigarette and looking out the thingy and generally not talking much. It was quite quiet. We just run out of convo, which is strange because we'd always be having a laugh doing stuff, but we'd run out of conversation. So we sat on this windowsill. Bear in mind, we were the only two really in there. The site foreman already said he's not coming in. He said he didn't want to. So it was us. Yeah, he did. Well, I'll tell you about that later. And so we sat on the windowsill and smoking. And it's gone quiet. And next minute, I hear the door, not far away, probably 2 doors down. I hear the door open, like, with the door, and then shut, bang. So I look at Bob, and I went, is that the wind? And he went, no, it's not very windy. I said, well, maybe someone's up here. And he looked at me, and I looked at him. And then we hear footsteps down the corridor. So we were in those rooms. So nobody's, unless they come behind us, gone in there and then come out and gone. So I said to Bob, that's somebody walking down there. And he was like, no. He said, it can't be. I said, go and have a look. And he went, no, you go and have a look. And I said, no, that's it was like, and we sat there thinking. And then we hear the double doors at the end go, the double doors. So I think, there has to be someone. So I said to Bobby's, look, that must be someone in there. Somebody must have come up. And he was like, no, you must have heard them because the footsteps, we had work boots on, but they got rubber soles, didn't they?
Right.
And these footsteps are almost like they were like cowboy boots, like really hard soles, donk, down this hallway. So immediately my hackles have got up. And Bob isn't this type of person at all. He rarely says a lot if it isn't about football or, some other thing. And so I'm looking at him, he's looking at me, and I said, I'm not keen on this place, Bob. It gives me the creeps. And he said, I'm not keen either. I said, look, let's speed through it. And I listen, this job was hundreds of years ago, so it doesn't matter. He said, let's just open up every other radiator. Let's just expedite the work. Sure. And he said, and if they find water in those ones, then I said, yeah, let's do that. So we go up down the corridor. Now, what we've got to do is we've got to go down the stairs at the end, and we've got to make our way back through to the other end. So we go down the stairs at the end, come through the doors of that end, walk down the corridor again, loads of rooms on the left-hand side now, not on the right, left-hand side with the windows, and we were in these rooms doing it and doing these things. So I then said to Boris, I said, I'm going to look down the corridor now, and I shouted down, and I was like, Brian, nobody's answering. I knew the other two men were down in the plant room because they was a two-man job to strip all the stuff out. So we're moving our way down, and Bob said to me, he said, if I hear footsteps again, Jeff, he said, I'm gone, I'm out. And I said, I understand that, mate. I said, but he said, because that doesn't sound like somebody who's walking. It was like a forceful walk. I said, no, that'd be all right, mate. I said, it could have been anybody. Don't worry about it. And in my head, I'm thinking, there's no way nobody was up here. We'd have heard them, the doors, but they were in there and they left. So anyway, we're probably near towards the end now. So we're near towards the central walkway, probably a couple of rooms left, and nothing's happened. It was all just a bit strange. And Bob was in one room. He went to one room, and I stayed in the room that we were together in. And I was looked out the window, and there's nothing going on. There's a courtyard out the back, and there's nothing there. Uh-huh. And I can hear a bell, like a ship's bell, ding-ling, 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 ding-ling. And I shouted through. I said, Bob, can you hear that bell? And he went, yeah. I said, who's ringing a bell? He said, I don't know. And I thought, that's really strange. Maybe it's a dinner bell, or maybe, but this place was in the middle of nowhere. So I thought, that's a strange thing.
So it was the sound was coming from outside?
Yes.
Okay.
As I looked out, the sound got louder, and it was an abandoned place, and it was not in the middle of nowhere, but you'd have to drive up a really long track to get. And it sounded like a handbell, that was somebody ding, 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 like this with this bell. So I said, that's strange. And it's getting towards the end of the day now. And I'm thinking, look, let's just skip it. We had another floor to do. And we were like, no, I'm not going to bother, Yeah. Really, that's what it got to. So then we're in this final room. I said, come on, Bob, let's scoot. I said, what we'll do is we'll go down this long corridor, come out the bottom, I said, and then walk back just to make sure that there's not, we're not leaving a bath or something in there running or this kind of thing. So the corridor was wide enough that you could fit 2 or 3 people. And it was quite funny because we were walking shoulder to shoulder. Nobody wanted to be behind. So we were walking shoulder to shoulder down this corridor.
Right.
And we got to the end of the foldy doors. And I left I had a coat. It was only a cheap one. And I said to Bob, I said, I've left my coat down the thing. And he went, leave it. He said, don't, honest. And I went, yeah, I said, I think I'll leave it. I said, it wasn't expensive. So we were both very kind of hackled up. And as we've come down the stairs, we're walking through the corridor, looking in the rooms, just like quickly looking. And as we're walking, we can hear footsteps behind us.
Wow.
And we speed up and these things get the thingy. And I'd like to say that it was an exit from the building that wasn't. We were panicked. Bob was actually screaming. He was shouting, but he wasn't shouting anything coherent. He was just swearing and no. And he would run. Yeah. So we run to the central staircase, and we've got one flight to go before we're out. And I go through the doors. Boom! These things bang open. We've crashed through, and I run down the stairs. Bob drops something, and I don't know what it was. Could be a spanner or a screwdriver. He dropped. We're not bothered. We're leaving. This is it. We're out.
Yeah.
So he was a lot older than me then, but he was down those stairs like a rabbit, you know. And so he's run down the stairs, and I don't know what came after us, but let's say it was a brick, but something very heavy was thrown behind us that bounced off of the wall in front, all the wood panelling. It went boom, 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 and hit the stairs. And I didn't look round to see, but it was something pretty heavy. And we fled the building.
Yeah.
And we've come outside, and I've turned around to look because I think there's someone or somebody's chasing, or it could be a local person or whatever. So I've turned around to look, and Bob's gone. He's gone. He's 100, like Linford Christie. He's doing this dash down. So I'm going, Bob, wait. And I thought, I'm not going to look anymore. If I see something, this is going to be the end. And it was quite a overcast day. It was winter time, like November-ish. So it was quite dark and cloudy, and it was a bit ominous. So we then fled to the car park where the site foreman's place was. Bob was in a real state, and we were smoking then. So I said, look, Bob, sit in the van. I said, have a cigarette, calm down. And he was just going, no, like this, no, swearing. And so I said, look, mate, it's all good, calm down. And I'm panicking, thinking that's not good in there. Yeah. And as I'm calming him down, the other 2 blokes that are in the plant room, they come out, they walk round from this courtyard, and they come round and they walk up towards me, and I can see them talking. And I said, you done? And he went, yes, done as much as we can do. And I said, all right. I said, have you drained it all down? He said, no, I've just left it go. He said, I'm not going to worry about it. He said, if it floods, it floods. I said, well, you should really look after it. He went, no. He said, I'm not staying here a moment longer. And I said, yeah, this is the 2 at the bottom. Yeah. So I said, all right. So I said, we had some strange stuff going on. And Bob's now, he's virtually just saying, no, his head in his hands. Like, and I said, that's really affected Bob. Yeah. And they said, yeah. He said, I said, did you hear a bell? And he went, yeah, we did. We heard a bell. I said, I heard it because they were the same back of the building. They were the same side. But I said, there's no bell tower or anything like that. He said, no. He said, it sounded like somebody that come in for your food or ring a bell to signal something. And he said, yeah, they said that they were in the boiler room. They had a radio, a little transistor radio, and they couldn't get a signal. So they'd get a signal, and then it would, and they'd move it, and it'd go, and then they'd move it. So in the end, they gave up, and they thought, oh, this is not working. So they turned their radio off. And he said, we were working in the quiet. He said, and then we could hear people talking, but you couldn't make out what it was. Mm. And I said, what? I said, could you understand it? He said, no, it's just like a mumble, like a talking. And he said, look, I forget the guy's name now, but that they were brothers. And he said, no. He said, what's the name? He said, he just said, no, I don't feel very good here. I don't feel good here. I don't feel right here. He said, and then they kind of abandoned it like we did. So they weren't very impressed. And then because I knew Brian, the site foreman, nobody else. He was a gruff fella, and I got on well with him for some reason. So they said to me, I was nominated to go and speak to Brian and say, we're off, we're going, we're not coming back, and we're not going to finish the thing. So I went in to see him and I said, Brian, have you got a minute? He said, yeah, no problem, Jeff, what's up? I said, mate, we're done. And I said, and we're not going back. And he said, no, me either. I said, what? I said, do you not like it? He said, no. He said, I don't believe in any of that. He said, but he said, it's not, there's something bad about it. He said, to the degree where, he said to his boss, who was my boss ultimately, that he said to his boss, he said, there's nothing in there worth anything. He said, nobody wants to go back in there, you just pull it down. He said, whatever's in there, you can dig out of the rubble. He said, because I'm not sending blokes in there. That was his, but a lot more forceful and vehement than that. So I said to him, I said, well, what happened to you in there? And he went, oh, it's just, he said, I said, it's probably something else, he said, but he said, and I said, no, tell me. I said, because I told him what had happened. I said, we heard footsteps. And he went, is that all? And I said, really? I said, what? Like this, and of course, it's piqued my interest. So I said, what happened to you? He said, well, when he first came and the cleanup team was there, his job was at the end of the day as a site foreman is to walk around the site, not the whole of it because it was massive, but they fenced off a building. They used to do it in sections. And his job at the end of the day was to make sure that there was no locals or somebody in the building, because if they got injured in there, he's liable. The company's liable. His job was to walk round. And he said, I did it for two nights. He said, 2 days. He said, and on the first day, he said, I felt uneasy. He said, and I could hear doors opening and stuff. And he said, on the second day, he heard a woman singing. A woman singing, but far distant. And he said, when I walked down the corridor, it didn't get louder or less noisy. It just remained the same constant volume as he walked down. And he found it strange that he couldn't pick up where it was coming from. He said, and then he said, oh no, there's something going on. So he turned round on the floor that we were on, where we missed that floor out, but it was the floor below us. And again, there was a load of rooms. So he turned round to go back out. I thought, I won't go all the way down. I'm just going to turn around. He said, and I don't know why, he said, before I got to the foldy outdoors, he said, I looked around just to make sure everything was good behind me. He said, I don't know why I did it. He said, but I turned around. This is the thing, I got goosebumps now because he was telling me, and it was so honest what he was saying. And he was a fearsome bloke, a really good boxer, good amateur boxer, and he suffered no falls. He was a lovely guy, but he was deadly serious, and he was pale. And he turned round to look down the corridor just to double check. And as he looked down, a child poked their body out of one of the doors and looked at him. And I said, wow. I said, what, like a kid? He said, yeah. He said, like a 3-4-year-old. He said, I knew there was no children in here. He said, but what sealed it for him is that the child had like a white nightdress on, like an old-fashioned nightdress. And he said, as the child leaned out just to look, like, oh, he's coming down the corridor. And he said, and I looked at the child, and the child looked at me. He said, and I backed away from the child, and the child just boom, straight back into the room. And he said, after that, he said, I don't go in there. He said I couldn't sleep. He couldn't sleep for about 3 or 4 nights. He wasn't a particularly religious man, but his mum was quite a religious person. So they did some kind of reading over him to try, and it really affected him to the degree that when we left this job and I saw him on other jobs, it affected him to that day. And but he was telling me, and it was so honest and so true. And I told him what had happened to us, and it was that whole site. So we never went back, because after that they just pulled the lot down. They couldn't even be bothered to go and get the copper out or anything. They just dragged the lot down. But the whole area was just so seeped in all of this kind of supernatural stuff. And like I said, he wasn't a guy that would lie or tell stories. He just didn't have time. He wasn't that type of bloke. But I tell you, and I left there, and Bob was in my van, was he driving back, and I thought, I don't tell him. So I said, and we had to stop actually on the way back. I think once or twice we had to stop for him, because he was really affected him. And he wouldn't talk about it, never talked about it. He just kept going, no, and that was the end of Hellingly Hospital. We never went back, and now God knows what it is, housing estate or.
That's fascinating on so many levels. Obviously, hospitals, asylums, those places are bathed in obviously pain, suffering, agony, sadness. Every spectrum of emotion is just imprinted on those buildings for from generations of people coming and going and all of that, and they just are always hot spots for this stuff. And I also found it interesting that Brian said, "I don't believe in this stuff," but yet he saw it. He saw it, and it's amazing to me how voraciously people will defend their paradigm. Like, this is my world. This is the world I live in. I'm not going to acknowledge that, but you can't ignore it either because he was confronted with it. So just fascinating, isn't it?
And like I said, most of the people like in the construction industry, they're not like caramel latte drink, because these guys are, they're straight down the line. And to come from him as well, because he was such a character, he was a real bruiser. And yeah, he said, "I don't believe in that stuff," he said. And when I said, "Oh, we've had some stuff happen," he went, "Oh, is that it?" As if to say, "Oh, right, that's it." And I was fascinated then.
Sure.
But like I said, I did see Bob the same, and him. It affected him very deeply, and I think in a way it almost gave him a crisis, not of faith so much, but it was almost like a door had been opened to him now, and he didn't have the, how do I say it? He didn't have the sensitivity to maybe ask the questions, to think, "Oh, what was that? Can I explore this avenue?" It was literally no, that's, and he was very gruff with it. But that place was. But we did several like that. I mean, we probably did about 20 that they knocked down, and some of them were. I felt so sorry for the people in there, because they were just lost souls. And this Hellingly Hospital was at a time where it was children in there that maybe had a disability, or maybe they had some kind of special needs. It's just so pitiful. So you can understand how the place was kind of seeped in it.
Yeah, there's no question. That's how these things are created. It's just. But you're right. Certainly, it was incredibly archaic, the way that people with special needs and such were treated in our history, and not only in the UK but around the world.
Oh yeah,
they were just put somewhere, and dealt with some. There's plenty of stories of families that had the one child that was developmentally disabled in some way, and they were kept in secret in some space of a house and never let out, because it was regarded as an embarrassment, which is so tragic, and how sad is that? But that's like the recipe for a pretty powerful haunting, I guess.
I mean, even to the degree, we have a really famous mental hospital in England. It's called Bedlam, which comes from the name. It's absolute bedlam. Yeah. In the Victorian times, you could pay money and go and stand and watch all the people, all the mentally ill people. It was a sport. You could pay and go and watch. Really? Believe it or not, that's absolutely true. Yeah, absolutely true.
Wow. So it was like a spectator sport.
Yeah, something to do on a Sunday. Let's go and look at the lunatics. Yeah, and they used to go, honest. Yeah, that's very true. And I believe it. That hospital, Bedlam, there's been so many books written about the place, and it was horrific, absolutely horrific. And how we treat, they would say, base the society on how they treat the children and the elderly. Yeah, that's what you base a society on, and there's not many places where I go, yeah, you do the right thing by your children, your elderly, and it's such a shame. And like we were talking about earlier, even if they'd have just kept it as a reminder, because there's a lot of other places that remind, but what a beautiful, I mean, you wouldn't stay there, my God, if it's turned into flats, you'd be, no way. But, just as a place to do it. But that was Hellingly Hospital, yeah.
Wow. I mean, it's fascinating on a number of measures, and it's also incredibly tragic because, all we can do is speculate. What's going on there? Why are they still there? Are they indeed lost souls? Are these something else pretending to be people, or what is it? But certainly in the case of them, living a life dealing with all of those challenges, and many, whether it's mental health or whether it's developmental disabilities. I mean, these are things people don't ask for in their suffering through life, but yet they're still there. Even after their body quit working, it seems like their presence is still there, and that to me is very sad.
I think it for me it's tinged with sadness, but also it's what makes them stay.
Yeah.
Unless where they're going is so bad that they think, oh, I'll stay here, or maybe they can't cross over. I don't understand the machinations of it, and I haven't read enough or looked at it enough. But I do think, what would make you stay somewhere like that? Was there any small part of that you went, oh, this is familiar, maybe? But it was a brutal place, even with no inmates in it. It was a brutal place, and some of the ones that we did visit prior to them moving the inmates out, oh, it's pitiful. It really was.
Yeah,
it really was. And these people need to be looked after. They need to be given medication, but so quickly they're treated like human refuse.
Yeah.
And yet the rest of the politicians and all the people that make money and all of these Burks, they're lauded up, whereas these people are the ones that need protecting.
Yes.
And to have a child back then that maybe was disabled or had a club foot or maybe was missing a limb, and your first thought is stick them in an asylum. I don't understand it. It must have been such a different, brutal time back then.
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was a different world in a lot of ways, and it's encouraging to me, at least, that we've seen to show a lot of progress in that avenue in our more modern day. Not that there's not a whole list of problems nowadays, but at least we seem to have different problems than we used to.
Yes,
or at least less of those kind. So.
Yeah, less of those kind, but I do believe there are still people that suffer that don't get the medication they need, and to be I know if they built another place like that had shops and it had, it'd be so much better. But we just don't do that. No. We should have communities for the elderly and the infirm, that these people can live in peace and not have any trouble. So that's a utopia I'm thinking about, but maybe one day, Brent.
Hey, from your lips to God's ears, brother.
Yeah,
fascinating story. So where are we going now?
Again, plumbing. This was another job. A completely different company, because obviously I'm a journeyman plumber, so I'd work for any company that would pay me. A completely different company. Sure. And it's still now, it's not derelict or anything like that. It was a school in a place near to where I work. I won't name it because it's quite famous. And it's been around a long time. And the only reason that the main train line to London exists is because one of the kings sent his son to the school. So they built a railway from Windsor to this school so his son could get to school. There you go, that bit of privilege. Sure. And this school exists, but it's a lovely place. Again, really, really old. And they were quite progressive in the schooling, so that they would have meditation and whole foods. It was really quite a cool place to be, and the kids were great, but we were never there when the children were there. They'd go on their summer holidays, and then the workmen would come in and fix the toilets and generally repair stuff. So I was over there with a firm that I worked for, and I was with the boss's son. It was only a small firm, a guy called Paul. So we were in this building, and it was a bit like, imagine the Pentagon, but in a square. So you had a building in a square, and then you had a courtyard in the middle. Oh, sure. And yeah, it was one of those. So if you walked through the building and out the back of the building, you were on a pavement or a sidewalk that was probably about 4 meters wide, and it ran round the entire walled garden. So you could look, and it had archways, a bit like you'd see in like some of these old schools like Cambridge and Eton. So you have these big stone archways, and then the gardens beyond in a square. It was lovely. It's kind of Romanesque, really. Beautiful place. And we were working in one of the rooms as you went through the main door, through the building, out the back of the building, onto this pavement type sidewalk that had a roof over it that looked on the gardens. Absolutely beautiful. There's fountains and plants. It was idyllic, really was. So we were walking through the main building, me and Paul, and our job, I forget what it was now, but some menial task. And our job was, we come out in the centre of this walkway, which was probably about 200 foot long. It was massive. In fact, the guy running the school I met, he's got a photograph of World War One Canadian soldiers racing motorcycles around this big square. On the sidewalk underneath the portico, they'd race their motorcycles in the First World War. He's got photographs of them racing. That's how big this thing was. It was probably, like I said, a half the length of a football field down and then half a length back in a giant square. So we'd walk through the building, come out in the centre, and then we'd have to walk right and go in a classroom and do our work. So we was in there doing it. Didn't feel anything different. I felt quite nice. The building was really beautiful, and it was like really picturesque. So, and I was working with this guy, Paul. He was older than me, but not by much. And then it was time for our lunch. So let's go back out to the van. And it was a sunny day. I said I would sit in the van in the sun because they had lovely grounds, and we'd be sitting there and look at all the deer and stuff. It's beautiful. So we come out of the classroom and we've turned left. So we've got to walk. In front of us is the sidewalk pavement that's got archways that no windows in. You could look onto the garden. A wall on our left with the main door halfway down. So we've probably got to walk, I would say, 150 foot, 200 foot to this doorway to go left and go out. And then beyond that doorway, all the way down, was another 250 foot of this portico. So, and we're chatting, doing our normal chat. Oh, we've got to pick this up, or make sure we do that when we get back. So I was on the outside. This sidewalk's wide, so I'd say probably 15 foot, 20 foot is big. And so we were walking near the gardeny bit. It was really pleasant. And I'm chatting to Paul, and we're looking ahead as we're walking down. I'm chatting to him. And as we're walking down, he's looking forward, and I forget what I was doing now. I was looking at him talking, and he said, "Oh, what's that?" And I said, "What's what?" And I've looked down this long corridor that's got opened up at one end, and right on the corner, I can only describe it as a cylinder of light. But it was, imagine you rolled up a carpet or a rug, and you put that rug, leaned it up against the wall. That's what it looked like to me, but it was like a sweet corn colour. It wasn't a bright yellow. It was a like your Superman t-shirt. It's it wasn't a bright shiny yellow, and that's what I saw. I just saw this. It looked like a bit of carpet that was quite glowing. So he's going, "Oh, what's that?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "It looks like a bit of carpet, or is it a light?" I said, and I kept looking, thinking maybe it's reflecting off something. And we're walking a bit closer, and he's going, "No, that's not a carpet." He said, "I think that's a person." And I saw just this tube of light. I didn't see anything else. And I said, "No, mate." I said, "Somebody's leaned something up against the wall, Paul." And he said, "No, mate." He said, "Look, I can see that. You can see the outline of his head." And we stood pointing. He's pointing at stuff I can't see. It's just this shape. So I said, "Well, why? What are you seeing then?" He said, "Well, I can see his head there. I can see his arm and his feet and his boots or his thing." And I said, "I can't see that." He said, No. He said, "It's weird." He said, "Have a look." And he kept going, look, there's his belt and there's his thing. So I said, "Well, let's walk down a little bit further and maybe I can see a bit more of it." Mm-hmm. Bear in mind, my eyesight's probably better than his. So I thought that was weird. So we walked down about another maybe 15 or 20 feet, maybe a bit more. And he's looking forward. He really is straining to see. And I'm straining and squinting to see. And then we go a little bit further, and he says, "Look there." He said, "There he is." He said, "You can't tell me that isn't a person." He said, "Look, I can see his boots. I can see his trousers." And I said, "What can you see?" I said, "Because I can only see a yellow tube. It's no more." Oh. And he said, I said, "Well, he's got boots on." He said, "His boots are too big." He said, "He's got massive boots on." He said, "And he's got trousers on. It's all in yellow. This monochrome in yellow." And he said, "And his trousers are really high, and he's got a shirt on with his trousers on." And he said he's leaning up against the wall, like as you would do as if you're waiting for somebody, with his arms crossed, leaning up against the wall, kind of waiting. So I said, "Paul, I can't see that." I said, "I really can't." I said, "No, I said, carpet, mate." I said, "Your eyes are playing tricks." He said, "No," he said, "I'm not going any further." He said, "I can see that. It's a person." So I said, "Oh, look, I'll walk down." I said, "Because maybe I need to see it a bit more." And I'm generally bemused because it looked like a tube of light. So I start walking a little bit further down. And as I go further down, it maybe looked a little bit more body shaped. It didn't look like a person. And then, just if you're in your garden in the summer and you're laying on looking at the clouds, clouds look like something, sure. And the next minute they just kind of dissipate. Well, as I'm walking slowly towards this thing, it just starts to dissipate and goes. And before I could say it's not there anymore. Paul went, it's gone. He's gone. He's walked off. And I said, Paul, it wasn't, mate. I could just make out the shape like a mummy, you know, where you could got a head and a bit of a shoulder. I couldn't see any of this detail, he said. And so I said, look, wait there. I'll walk down. I said, come down. We'll have a look. And he went, I'm not going down there. He said, I don't know what that was. He said. So I said, look, I'll go down and walk, because I hadn't seen anything that was particularly scary. And I half expected to go down, and the clouds had changed and there's a roller carpet. I really did expect to see that. Yeah. So I go down to the corner, right to the end, which, bear in mind, is, like I say, 250 foot down. I go down to the corner, and all there is a grandfather clock, but just on the corner. So I'm shouting back, and I said, Paul, it's just a mate. It's a clock. You saw the clock. He said, no, he was leaning up against the clock. He said, I said, well, there's nothing here. And you look down the corridor, and you could see if somebody was walking out, you know, across this courtyard. And I said, no. I said, there's nothing here. There's Grant. He said, no, he's leaning against it. Anyway, we had this back and forth. So I had my tape measure in my pocket. So I said, tell you what then. I said, I'll show you where this roller carpet was. And I said, and we'll measure it. So he said, yeah, we'll do that. And we worked in feet and inches then, you know what I mean? So I dug this thing up, and it's about 5 foot, 5'1", 5'2". I said, it was there. And he went, yeah, that's how tall he was. I said, it's about 5 foot. So I thought, so I go back to him now, and we go out to our van, and he's a bit combobulated. And I said, it might be a trick of the light, Paul. He said, no, he said, because it glowed. He said, it didn't shine, it kind of glowed internally. Oh. And I said, well, I did see that. I said, but I didn't see a person. And he said, no. He said, he had really his boots were too big, like he'd worn somebody else's boot, and he had trousers on, but the waist was too high, and it was tied up quite loosely, and the shirt was kind of billowy, and it was just a man or a boy in yellow, just leaning up with his arms folded, leaning up against this grandfather clock, watching us as we were walking down the thing. Yeah. And he was absolutely adamant. And he wasn't such a case of going, I didn't see that. He couldn't work out, and I couldn't work out what he was seeing to confirm it. And because I couldn't confirm it, he then kept saying, no, you definitely saw it. I said, I didn't see it. I said, I saw what looked like a rough outline. And he was going, didn't you see his belt and his thing? I said, no, I didn't see any of it. And that's what the story was. I couldn't confirm, and he couldn't deny. So he didn't have an ally, so couldn't. And he kept trying to say, no, you saw this. And in the end, I just said, look, I don't know what it was. I said, but I didn't see. And I always wondered, I don't know, not that we ever spoke about him and stuff that happened to him or anything about spiritual or paranormal, but I was quite upset, because I thought, well, I'm the one that was intrigued, and I'm the one that wanted to. He was not bothered at all, and I thought to myself, well, how comes he saw detail? Yeah, and I never saw the detail. So and I don't know what your view is, but I could never work out why that was. Boy, he saw something, and I genuinely, Brent, it was like a tube of light. That's all it was. But it wasn't, it didn't dissipate any light. It was like a glow stick. Okay. But never shone out. And I always wondered, why him and not me?
Right. And it's interesting because when you first saw it, you're saying it was like a tube, but as you did get closer, it kind of started to approximate a human shape. And then as you got closer still, it dissipated, and you both saw it disappear at the same time. You both saw it in the same position. It's his perception that was much more detailed, and yours was more ambiguous. That is interesting, and that comes up actually it's not uncommon in paranormal experiences that people will perceive things differently, and maybe it's any number of mechanics. It could be a function of the pineal. Maybe it was never really visible, but you each have a different range of perception in your pineal gland, which is oftentimes attributed as the third eye. Like that's our psychic eye, and people will see things, and they would swear they were really there. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but it is interesting that you both had different perception of it. It also comes up in audio phenomena, and it can be a group of people will be in a location, and let's say it's a group of 5 people, and 3 people will hear a shrill, horrible screaming. Another person may hear a weird sound, and another person yet heard nothing at all. And it's hard to conceptualize what is going on in those situations, but it seems to be, that the phenomena is filtered very uniquely through our individual lenses. And some people, maybe are much less sensitive, and that's I didn't see anything or I didn't hear anything, when everyone else is like, are you kidding me? It was this horrible scream. And it really boggles the imagination, but it doesn't seem to be so much a physical thing, even though you're perceiving it as it's right there. I can see it. But, again, in hospice situations, a lot of times people that are just about to pass will have encounters, and they'll swear their long deceased, spouses waiting there for them. And, angels are coming, and everyone else in the room is like, I'm not seeing anything. What's going on? And it's anybody's guess, but I suspect that it's maybe less physical manifestations or experiences and much more energetic. And maybe that experience was more for him. Perhaps what you guys saw was somehow specifically more for him, but you also were able to perceive it as well to some measure. It's anybody's guess, brother. I wish I knew.
Yeah, it was a real conundrum. The other thing I thought of was we kind of see this maybe as a projection. It's projected upon us. Yes. But my view of it maybe it's projected from us. So we have the whole thing tilted. So when we think it's like somebody, projecting an image on a wall that we're going to view, but maybe the projection is from us to see, because we had totally different aspect. I didn't feel afraid. I genuinely thought it was some kind of carpet. I just thought it'd be easily explained, or a shaft of light or something. Sure. So I was thinking to myself, well, if that image is there portrayed for everybody to see at that particular moment with that clarity, I didn't see it like that. So maybe he was projecting that, or we're projecting that image together, and he sees it clearly because he was the one that was bringing it forth, if you like, bringing it into reality. Right. That's the only thing I could think of.
Yeah. Well, I think it's fascinating, and I think that we don't give ourselves enough credit. Like, in these experiences, we think that things are happening to us. But I think for every paranormal experience, there's one common denominator, and that's the experiencer. Well, we're a part of the equation somehow. We're a part of this connection that happens between us and this weirdness. And so I think we dismiss ourselves as more of a victim of it, but I think that we are in some ways, and probably very much unconscious or subconsciously, we are facilitating these experiences. And it, again, it has to... It can be as a result of any number of strange mechanics that we don't understand, but I think that we often, don't, and maybe it empowers us, maybe that's more of an empowering statement. Like, look, you are part of whatever this connection was in this experience. So don't dismiss yourself. It didn't happen to you. It happened with you. You know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
No, I totally agree. Okay. Again, you're the conduit for this, and maybe his conduit was stronger to project the image for him stronger than it was for mine. Right. It's just fascinating. I haven't thought much about it. I have to be honest. It's not really my thing. But
sure,
whenever I kind of delve into this, I do think. Are they just these people playing part of their daily routine? Is it just the role that they play, or is it purposefully to demonstrate? I mean, the child looking at Brian, and it shocked him. It definitely looked at him, because he recognised this yellow that I didn't see, but the guy, it was looking at us. And I think, well, was the conduit through Paul to then project to this thing to then appear, and I wasn't on the same wavelength. I wasn't on the same narrow band, and I was off at a 45-degree angle, and I didn't see that. So it's a fascinating thing, and I suppose as well, nobody knows, do they? We just don't know what it is.
It's all speculation, but I would at least guess that it was more directed towards him, but you were there as well. That whatever this experience was for him for some reason, and I can't, possibly understand. No. But I don't know. That's just my take on it, for whatever that's worth.
No, listen, it's as valid as any other take, I think, because maybe one day we'll find out. But for the minute, yeah. I do wonder why these things happen. Like I said, I know it's probably the buildings. They must have an energy within them that lets it manifest. Because rarely do you hear of people saying, "I was outside in the middle of a field with nothing about, and a thing popped up." Yeah, it always has to have, doesn't it? It has to have some kind of thing. And I think because I'm in so many buildings every day, you do tend to pick up on it.
Yes, absolutely, and I think that there's certainly. That's certainly a big part of it. It's locations and imprints. Some of it may be residual, just things that are playing out again. They're like a psychic imprint that, for whatever reason, repeats. Like a movie in your DVD player or on your streaming movie. It's the movies. The actors aren't even aware that you're sitting there watching them, but you are able to perceive this event. And those are generally called residual haunts, and they're not really conscious. They're just like a replay, a moment in time repeating. Some of it could be intelligent, like the little boy looking at that guy was. I mean, that was very personal. So I mean, that does sound like an intelligent haunt, like it's an active intelligence or presence that's there and is aware of the people around it and when they're in its space. So and any number of things. I mean, there's other ideas of things like egregores that are more created by us, like the expectation of there being a haunting. If enough people believe in it, it seems the haunting will manifest and it'll become a real thing. So a lot of strangeness in this world, brother. But I'll tell you what, we've gone about as much time as we got today. So you're definitely you're definitely going to have to come back because I know we got more ground to cover, brother.
Thank you so much. As time flies, you're so fascinating, and like I said, I'm so inquisitive about all of this, and maybe together we maybe come up with a theory. It'd be nice to understand it more, I think.
Yeah, I think we're all just trying to understand what the hell this stuff is, but it's an incredible journey all the same. But thank you, Jeff, for coming on again, and you and I will dial in the next appearance, and we'll dive even more into what you've been through.
Thank you, Brent. Really appreciate it, as usual. Lovely to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. My pleasure, sir. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap it up for us today. So hope you guys enjoyed the show, and thank you again so much for all your love and support. And remember, if you want to follow the Paranormal Portal, probably the easiest way is to head over to paranormalportal.net. And that's the homepage for the Paranormal Portal. And you'll find links to all of our different social media and sites and information about the shows, including our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/paranormalportal. Or just look for Paranormal Portal on Google or whatever search engine, and you'll find links to our social media such as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. So we're kind of all over the place, and we're spreading as well as we can. But anyway, thank you so much for the love and support. Y'all take care, and remember, we love y'all. Be good, be kind, be nice. Take care of each other, help each other out, find the magic in every day, and remember to laugh as much as you can. Until next time.